Welcome to the first ever live version of the Rev Up. I'm very excited to be doing this. Very excited to be sharing some concepts more from ourselves. Obviously, we always have so many great guests on the Rev Up, the podcast. So this time I'm excited to share some of I suppose our thoughts and contents at Trust the Process, how we go about doing things, but also give the opportunity to answer some questions. We'll have some people live asking questions. We've also got some questions that some listeners have sent in. We will go through those towards the end. The first portion of this particular live podcast is that we are going to go through a couple of things. The first thing that I want to go through is I really want to share with everybody what the ideal growth engine looks like in terms of structure, in terms of the pieces that make it up. And I think this is a really important piece of context because the individual elements that make up how we grow across marketing, across sales, and even breaking down within those elements across onboarding, across account management, and those sorts of things. They all actually really need their own strategy. They need their own, sometimes people. But I think most importantly, they need their own goals and KPIs. And this is really the critical element. When they have their own goals and KPIs, then we are not all working towards one set of KPIs or one metric and measurement that doesn't actually fit for what the other parts are. So I'll explain this a little bit more as we go through this process. So let's get started. I'm just going to share my screen. So first and foremost, when we are creating a growth engine, it's important to think about the individual components. Here at Trust the Process, what we talk about all the time is that the individual components, there's 5 of them ultimately. And you'll notice the absence of the words marketing or sales. And I think that's, that really is intentional because marketing even in itself is made up of a couple of pieces. And so let's talk about those first. Number 1, right? We want to be trying to create demand, right? If we want to create demand, ultimately what we're trying to do is teach our audience how to win in the arena that our solution exists within, right? We want customers that come to us because they want to talk to us, not because they want to talk to somebody, and in the Trust the Process context, we want somebody that wants to talk to Trust the Process about offshoring. We don't want somebody necessarily that just wants to talk about offshoring, right? Because when they want to talk to us specifically, because they've learnt from us, because they trust us from the content that we produce and from the conversations that we have, then we end up in a position where it's not super competitive, right? When we've created the demand for our solution, then the competition becomes significantly less. The pressure on price becomes less because you are now the trusted provider. The second part is that we have to be able to capture demand, right? If we've created demand, it has to be really easy for our customers to then find us and opt in and get to speak to the right person and make it to the right place. I'm sure everybody here has had a situation where they have personally gone to speak to a business with the intent to buy, or maybe very close to the intent to buy, and it was just so hard to do business with them. It was just so hard to buy from them. It was not convenient. They weren't fast. They weren't effective. And eventually you went, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to buy from them anymore, right? We have to make it super easy to capture that demand. But also we don't create all of the demand for our product. So, for a lot of businesses right now are living and growing exclusively off demand that other people have created. And so we have to have good ways to capture that demand as well. And that will mostly be things like search, organic and paid. things like that. The third element is how do we convert it when this is ultimately your sales process, right? Once they have opted in and they want to actually have a conversation with somebody, how do we make sure that we have a sales process that maintains momentum, that helps them to get the certainty that they need and the connection that they need and the belief that they need in order to take action? And then how do we make it really easy for them to transact with us, right? How do we make it really obvious, really easy for them to get started and become a customer? Once they become a customer, how do we help them succeed? We're not here doing deals. We're not here making sales, right? We're trying to help people ultimately. And so once they start with us, it shouldn't be a shock to them where it's like, wow, that sales process was amazing, but it's not what has actually ended up happening once I joined the company. Once I became a customer. They should have a great onboarding experience. They should have people that are working alongside them to help them to succeed. We need to understand what their objectives are. We need to understand how they get a win, how they get to wins fast, and help them to do that. And once we do that, what we'll find is that number 5, expand the relationship, actually becomes relatively easy. Right? But we do also still need to have a plan for it. How are we going to ascend our customers through an ascension product model, or how are we going to expand on what they're already buying from us? How are we going to seek referrals? How are we going to cross-sell, upsell, all those things, which, to be honest, do they have the problem that the cross-sell solves? And we understand that by obviously having conversations with them and understanding our customers, right? So that's the model. And the reason why I think it's important to structure it this way is because, I mean, particularly between create demand and capture demand, what most businesses are doing is they're just going, how many leads have we generated, right? And leads as a metric is generally a relatively bad one for a couple of reasons. I think one of the main ones is that if you only are measuring how many leads you're generating, you tend to find over time that your marketing team will hit that leads number, but the quality of those leads will continue to decline over time. And so we have to have good metrics in each of these areas. If we're going to create demand, how are we going to measure that? Because leads won't necessarily be a good way to be able to measure it. And you also have to have a plan for how you're going to be able to see the effect that it has. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think this is just a really important piece of context to understand how should we organize our growth engine? How should we strategize about it? What are the individual elements? So I promise this is a Q&A session as well as a live podcast. We have a few people joining us live. I know we're going to do some Q&A at the end, but this is obviously an important first structure to be talking about. So I will just check. Do we have anybody that wants to ask any questions about this in particular?
Not right now. All good.
Cool. Cool. I appreciate the answer. All right, we're moving on. So, the first thing that's not about the structure that I want to talk about is how to build an audience through content, and I want to talk about this in context of creating demand. Number 1 in the cycle. And I want to talk about this for 2 reasons. One is that I think this is an area that actually a lot of businesses really struggle with, right? They don't know how to create good content. They don't know what they should talk about. They don't know who they should be talking to. And so I want to talk through what is the structure that can be used? What's the process we can follow in order to be able to create content? I also want to talk about it because this is a journey at Trust the Process that we've been going through. I know everybody here knows I'm very honest about these things, and we've been doing this for about 7 months now, and it's been a challenge. It's been a massive learning curve, but it has also been achieving some results. It's already started to become a really important channel for us as far as how we create demand and how we build actual convertible pipeline. And so I really just want to share some of the lessons that we've learned along the way in building this for ourselves and now in also building it for some clients. Right? We're only 7 months in, so there's lots of lessons still to learn, but we've certainly learnt a lot in the last 7 months. So I think the important first question is, why would you want to build an audience in the first place? Can't I just go and get leads from Google or from Facebook? Just pay and someone will give me the leads, right? Well, it is an emerging world, and I suppose the most important thing to always remember is that Facebook and Google, etc., are not charities, and they always will want to have you pay more for what you're getting than you previously did. That is a part of perpetual growth, and so you will always find that it is a constantly declining channel. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of businesses are finding this at the moment. 2 to 1 is the global average ROAS on AdWords, right? There's been some surveys done. The global average across those surveys was a roughly 2 to 1 ROAS and declining from the previous couple of years. $2.96 is the average cost per lead across AdWords as well. I've only given you some AdWords statistics here because I've got a particular AdWords bee in my bonnet lately. But $2.96 is the average CPL, and that is increasing over the last couple of years. This won't be everybody's experience. Some people are doing ads really well and getting great return out of them. It is also something that we at Trust the Process are doing, right? But it is something that if you are not constantly working on, if you don't have the right expertise, it's really hard to get a good return from. If you're just a business owner that's mostly running your own marketing, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. And the last thing is, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the way people are making decisions, particularly in B2B, has massively changed since COVID. I know sales trainers around the world have been saying this for 10, 15 years, that the world of sales has changed. The world of decision-making in business has changed, particularly in the last couple of years. Particularly in B2B, there are more decision makers than ever before. You know, in part, this is just accessibility. It used to be that you had to get 2 or 3 people together in a boardroom and present to them, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, everyone just joins on a Zoom, right? Even the person that's on holiday joins for this super important decision, right? The number of decision makers involved has massively skyrocketed. But also the way people are seeking out information, I don't actually think has changed. I just think we've become much more aware of it. People want to get advice. They want to learn. They want to get referrals. They want to talk to their connections. And they do a lot of this in places that we don't track. And so the reason I say no internet is because a lot of these decisions, a lot of these referrals, a lot of these conversations are happening in places that attribution software is not picking up. And so it's really difficult for some businesses to figure out where their demand is coming from. And so we need to build an audience because people are making decisions in places that Facebook and Google and other places can't touch. Business networking communities, even things like Facebook groups where someone says, who should I go and speak to? And they say, you should go and speak to Nat Coco. And shout out Nat Coco. And that person then Googles Nat Coco and goes and finds her. Willow branding. If you're looking for it.
That's Willows with an S.
Willows, sorry, with an S. My bad.
Thanks for the shout out, Ben.
No problem. Or inflow for Hugh, in-flow.com.au.
Yeah, nailed it.
Jim, what's your URL? Let's just do plugs now.
All right. MMMhub.org.
Fantastic. All right, everyone back on mute because we're getting an echo. Live recording, the fun. Hugh. It was always going to be you, wasn't it?
Love it.
So somebody wants to do that, they Google you, and all your attribution is seeing is organic search, right? Or maybe they even know from this it might be direct traffic, not a Google search, right? Because now they know your URL. So we need to account for this. We want people coming to us, and the goal here is we want to beat Google, right? We want to beat Google. We don't want them going to Google and Googling outsourcing in the Philippines. We want them going to Google and Googling trust the process outsourcing, right? We want to beat Google. We don't want Google to send them to whoever. We want them to send them to us. So, how do we build an audience? We need to build a content engine. If we're going to build a content engine, we need to have a good process for it. The best way that we have found to do this is with a bit of leverage. And this is certainly not a brand new idea. A lot of people would call this process a pillar content strategy. I know the world famous Gary Vaynerchuk talks about that all the time. Lots of people do. But the concept is that we want to create leverage, right? And leverage where we can do the work once, and that one piece of main content creation work springs out a lot of pieces of content, right? So step one is we obviously have to build a content strategy. We have to understand what are we going to talk about? Who are we going to talk to? I'll talk about those things in a second. The second thing we need to do is we then need to build a process that allows us to leverage that one piece of content that we make. And so the way it works for us is we record a 1 hour to 90-minute video, something like what we're doing right now. How meta is this? You guys are inside the matrix of our content engine. Capture video content. We edit that content and turn it into one good piece of video content. That can also be a podcast. It can be a number of things, but one long-form piece of content. That then gets converted into many pieces of content across many formats. Video, quotes, thumbnails, emails, blogs, etc. from the same one piece of content. Write copy for how we're going to post it, where we're going to share it, and share it for approval, and then schedule it in a piece of scheduling software for distribution. So let's just quickly talk about the strategy element. The first thing we need to do is we need to have avatars. We need to understand who the heck are we talking to. I've given you an example here. This is something we try and help our clients do at the start of building a content engine for them as well. First thing is avatars. 2 parts to avatars: demographics. What size of business are they? How many staff do they have? Where are they located? What's the job titles you want to talk to? What kind of business are they? What are some elements that are really important for how you want to solve a problem? What industries? I think I already said that. All right. What are the demographics of this person that we want to talk to? And then what are their psychographics? What are their motivators? So we talk about it in 2 pieces: away from and towards. So an example of this particular person, their away from motivators might be doing everything or managing everything very closely within their business. They've hired some people, but it's a bit hit and miss and sometimes seems like more trouble than it's worth. Can't afford the best people because they're not super big yet. You know, this is a $500 to $2 million business, and so they have to hire and train and manage very closely, right? Et cetera, et cetera. What are the things that they don't like? What are the problems that they have? And then what are their towards? They want growth. They want time, freedom, lifestyle, to be able to delegate effectively. And these sorts of things would be quite different if the demographics were larger. Let's say we were talking about a $10 million to $50 million business right? A lot of what the person that we're going to be talking to is looking for is going to be different because they have some scale, they have people, right? They probably have a bit more defined work-life situation than your standard startup entrepreneur does, right? So away from and towards, really important to understand your customer. You have to know that first. Then you have to decide, what are you going to talk to them about? This is the structure for how I think about defining topics, right? How are you going to talk about them being your customer? And there's some elements within that. What's the journey that they typically go along in their world? What's the core challenges that they face in their from and to, where they are and where they're trying to go to? What are the roadblocks? What are the challenges? What is the gap between those two things? Is it something that's very close and easy to resolve? Is it something that's a long journey that requires a lot of mountain climbing and deep diving over a long period of time? What's the gap between the two things? What are paradigm shifts that they need to make, right? Then how are you going to talk about you, right? How did you earn it and learn it? Anybody that's ever done training for presenting from stage will have heard the earned it and learned it line, which is essentially, why are you somebody, what's your story? Why are you somebody that they should listen to about this topic? What's your superpower? How do you solve the problem? How should they go about deciding how to solve the problem, right? And then also, how are you going to talk about the market? What's happening in the market at large that you have insight on that people should be aware is coming, right? There's a great book by a guy named Oren Klaff. I know you'll appreciate this, Hugh, as a fellow avid reader, by Oren Klaff, called Pitch Anything. Another one which is, flip the script. Almost forgot it for a second there. Where he talks about what's the winter's coming moment, right? A good Game of Thrones reference. Winter's always coming. So what is the winter's coming moment across the horizon? What is the thing that actually is already happening and people are already taking advantage of that is happening now, but most won't take advantage of for a while? The future is now. And how do they get ahead and ride the wave? So these are just some of the areas that I think about when I'm trying to create topics that I want to cover for that avatar. And essentially, when we pick one of these topics, so let's say we say the core challenges in the talk about them, the way you want to extract that is you say, okay, what's this core topic, client challenge? What are the three pillars that make up that challenge? What are the three most important things about that challenge? And then what are the things you can do about those three different things? Or what are the three deep dive areas within those things? And if you think of it in these terms, it actually starts to become pretty easy to come up with hundreds of topics to talk about. You'll be surprised when you dig a bit deeper. This is just asking the why, right? What's the client challenge? Okay. Why is that important? What are the elements that make it up? Okay. That's one element. Why is that important? What are the elements that make it up, right? What is that an example of is above. What's an example of that is below. I don't know if anyone here's ever heard the chunking up, chunking down concept. You write these concepts down. Get all of these topics out of your head, right? You have to actually take some action and sit down and do some writing and go, here's all the things I want to talk about. But you'll be surprised if you think of it in these terms, or if you do it with somebody that knows how to do it, how quickly you can come up with 50 plus topics to talk about. And for most businesses, I would say you don't need 50. You probably only need 10 good ones on rotation, and you will be able to create a really solid content engine. Okay. Next step is capture the goodies. This is the really simple part. How are you going to record it? We obviously record on Riverside. We also are going live through LinkedIn Live, but we record through Riverside. You can record through Zoom. You can record through Google Meet. The trick is just do it. the most important thing is you definitely need a good quality microphone. Don't know if anyone can notice, but Jim and I share a quality microphone. Well, not share it. We have the same one, which is the Shure MV7. That is definitely my recommendation. I know, Nat, you also do some podcasting. Have you got a microphone recommendation?
This is just the normal everyday one, but yeah, I've got the Shure SM7V as well.
Oh, nice. Nice. And then it doesn't just have to be in podcast or video format, right? I have this other picture here because if you're speaking at events, capture it, right? If you run your own events, that's obviously easier. If you're speaking at other people's events, have your team come along and capture it. You know, if you've got a half-decent microphone and they even just capture it on a good iPhone camera, right? Even just on a good iPhone camera, I promise you will be able to create content out of it. Let the editing do its magic, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. The video quality doesn't have to be perfect. You just got to capture. Start capturing constantly, even outside of that one pillar that you do. Then the trick is break it up into pieces. This famous quote from Archimedes, who knows how accurate it is after all of this time, but give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. We just need some leverage here. And so this is what it kind of looks like in terms of a breakdown, depending on who's doing it. 90-minute video turns into a long-form video, a long-form audio, a long-form text, right? So a podcast, a YouTube video, a podcast, a blog, right? The long-form video turns into a whole bunch of 1 to 3 minute snippets of that video, which turns into a whole bunch of 15 to 30 second snippets of those videos. The long-form audio, you probably have less options in terms of audio, but you can certainly do pieces. Some people will do multi-parts. So if you do a 90-minute video, you might do 3 30-minute podcasts. And long-form text, one big blog might become 2 big blogs, might become 4 emails, might become a whole bunch of text-based social posts. Don't know if anyone notices this, but quite often your text-based posts will actually get shared the most, particularly on places like LinkedIn. Understanding how that works is pretty important, but you can turn that one blog into 20, 30 pieces of content if you really want to. You don't necessarily need to. This is what an actual process flow looks like. This is what we do. So source recording goes in at the top. We have essentially a content producer who watches all the way through, right? And while they watch all the way through, they're marking up the video. What quotes do I want to pull out? What 2 to 3 minute videos do I want to pull out? What shorter snippets do I want to pull out? All of the marking up the video for when does it happen, the things that we want to pull out, and what parts do we want to cut, etc. That then gets sent on to our video editor, who will essentially make the first full-length YouTube video and full audio file, right? The audio file will have a podcast intro on it. The YouTube video will not, which then flows down into the building out of all of the different pieces of video content. We actually convert our current YouTube videos into vertical videos as well, which is not perfectly ideal, but I don't have to make vertical videos separately, so it works for us. Just top and bottom is where we put then the overlay for the words. That then gets pushed through to a graphic designer who makes all of the thumbnails, etc. for the social posts. It also, the opposite direction goes to the copywriter who starts writing the blogs, the articles, the emails, all of those pieces. Comes back in one document at the end where the producer then looks over everything, does copy editing, watches it one last time, goes for approval, and then gets uploaded into a scheduling tool, right? That is essentially 28 pieces of content, which is a content strategy of one piece of content per day going out to your audience, right? That's what that process produces. Distribution. It's important to just decide where do your customers exist. For us, we're going out through podcast platforms, YouTube, email, LinkedIn. We also post on Instagram and Facebook, and we are about to start posting on TikTok as well. Right? And the reason we'll post on TikTok is because we're already making vertical content. So it's literally no additional work to post it to TikTok as well. So may as well. Anybody that is watching this now or later that wants to come and talk to us about building a content engine, we are now 7 months in officially doing this for our clients as well. The results for us have been really, really great. Already building significant pipeline on the back of this process. So if you want to come and talk to us about doing this for you, scan the QR code and we can do so. All right. That is the main content piece. So now we are on to the fun stuff. The fun stuff being the Q&A. We have some live guests who I would very much like to get their questions live from. I've got some sent in as well that I'll do at the end. But whoever has a question, feel free to jump in and fire away. I know you always have a question, Nat, so hit me up. What do you got?
Okay, so my questions are based around, I guess, more startup entrepreneurs. And so my questions are based around that. So here we go. What are the most important aspects a new entrepreneur or business owner should focus on to effectively understand business and sales? So the reason I asked that question is that 2 years into my journey now, I think a lot of business owners who are at different stages are starting to ask me these same questions. So I thought I'd ask them here and get a professional to answer them so I can send them over here to listen to the whole thing.
Oh, a professional. That's a little strong for me, Nat.
Yeah, well, I'm only speaking the truth, mate.
Appreciate it. So I think this is an interesting question because there's honestly a lot of answers to it. I heard somebody say, actually it was Dale Beaumont. I heard him say a little while back, Dale Beaumont from Business Blueprint. He said, I once asked somebody, what's the one piece of advice? What's the one thing I should really focus on in business? What's the one piece of advice you would give in order to grow a business? And the person responded to him, the best piece of advice I could ever give you is there is not one thing. There are a shitload of things. There's so many things. And trying to just focus on a few can be relatively detrimental to an entrepreneur because the entrepreneur's job really is to be the top of a big T, right? Everybody in terms of their expertise will mostly either be the top of the T or the bottom of the T. Some people are very very shallow, but very broad in what they understand, and some people are very deep, right? And so if you've started a business with an area of deep expertise, your job really now is to figure out how do I become the top of the T? Because if you're going to lead a business to significant growth, you're going to have to understand marketing and sales and how to develop products and how to survey customers and understand what they need. You're going to have to be able to understand some degree of marketing analytics. You're going to have to understand operations and supply chain logistics and contracts and renewals and You're going to have to understand them at least to some degree because it's really hard to manage people as you scale, right? It's really hard to manage people on things that you have no idea about. And And that first layer of management that you end up with are going to be people that are doing things, right? When you go up a level from that, well, now you're managing people who are managing people who are doing things. And so only those managers actually really need to know how to do the thing, right? But you have to have this broad understanding so that as you scale, you can still manage and you can still give guidance and you can still strategize because you understand how the things work, at least to some degree. However, having said that, I'm going to completely contradict myself and say early in the process, the most important two things to understand are how to market and how to sell, right? Nobody goes into a business with absolutely no idea how to do something, or at least some people that know how to deliver a product. If you already have a business, you're already selling stuff, you at least have some idea of how the product works, right? Now, how many people can I get in front of, and how many people can I convert to customers, right? So marketing and sales, I think, are the two most important things. If anyone wants to grow a business, that is where all of the growth comes from. I would just focus intensely on those two things. Marketing gives you scale, sales gives you conversions, right? It's impossible to scale far if all of your growth is built on sales. Like, marketing has a far greater leverage, right? But sales is ultimately where the rubber hits the road. So you need both. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I answered it well.
I think you answered it well. I think I'd just like to add to that is that as I was hearing you speak and had the privilege to have some of your training in the past, I think maybe I would add is like clearly identify what you actually want to achieve. So it's all well and good to be able to grow and scale a business, but what's the actual end game in mind? Like, for some business owners, it might be, I want a team of 5 so I can do this, and that's their scalability. And I think understanding of like, where do you want to take the business so you can implement those strategies before that. And I think for me, like hearing you say that, I'm just like, oh, maybe that was me asking the question more than, the other business owners that are coming to me. So, but that really puts it into perspective in regards to...
I think your answer is better than my answer, Nat, because it's so important. Actually, if you don't have a destination, if you don't know what you're working towards, like what is the point of all this? That is the starting point. What are we trying to do? And I'm not talking in terms of like, what's our revenue goal, right? But where are we trying to go in terms of what's the mission here? Where are we trying to get to in terms of what's the vision, right?
Yeah.
Because all of that stuff is super critical to being able to scale, because you've got to give people something to buy into. Nobody that you hire will give a shit about whether you become a $50 million business. They do not care, and they shouldn't care, right? Because revenue is a bad goal, right? What's the point? I think that's the first and most important thing, and the most important thing to focus on. And as you scale, actually, it is the CEO's job to constantly be reminding people of what we're trying to do, what the mission is. Yeah. That's a great answer.
Yep. Well, thank you for stimulating that answer.
All right. What do we got next? Give me more questions. Jim, what do you got?
All right. I'm actually going to throw a little bit of a curveball and change up the question that I sent you earlier after seeing your presentation. I was thinking about the content cycle and the process you have set up. And I'm wondering, do you also, within that process that you go through, do you have a way that you consistently measure the results of what you're putting out there? To kind of, you're putting out a piece of content every day, 28 days in the month, pretty much every day you're putting out a piece of content, the picture you showed with the 28 pieces of content out of one recording. And, that's a lot of opportunity to learn what's working. And then the next time, the next month you record your next video or podcast, you can kind of take those learnings and tweak and try new things and test and see how they work out. And I'm wondering, so I'll kind of throw that also into the context of measurement getting a little bit harder with things like GDPR and loss of data, and Apple changing things on us with iOS 14.5 and kind of ITP and ATT and all those fun things. So.
Yeah, I think this is like the question that so many people in marketing are trying to answer. I think there's So for us, there's a relatively simple answer, which is an old answer, and it's a relatively low tech answer, which is that we shifted to. Actually, there's really two parts to it, right? We shifted to a self-reported attribution model because the whole purpose of this content engine is to create demand, which is obviously what I talked about at the start. The point is to create demand. So what we want to understand is, where did the demand get created, right? Where did they hear about us? And so all of our pipeline now gets asked, and there's a few ways you can do it. All of our pipeline now gets asked, where did you hear about us, right? And so one of the options in the drop-down list is podcast. But there's also things like networking groups, business networking groups, for example. There's referrals. There's lots of options that we don't often pick up from a digital tracking perspective. And in doing so, we have identified that some of those channels are actually super important for us, are actually really high converting, really high quality lead sources for us. And so that's probably one part. The other part is, in order to do that, you really need to organize your tech in terms of batching your lead sources. You need to be able to understand that there is a difference between where did demand get created and where did it get captured. And so separating between where did they hear about us and what was the path they took to find us, because we still want to be able to measure, like, how many people actually arrived through search, for example. We still want to be able to measure that. And so nobody's ever going to say that that they found you through AdWords, right? They will say they Googled you, right? But then which one was it? Which one was it? Was it organic or was it an ad? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't remember. Nobody's paying attention to that, so they're not going to remember. So you want to be able to digitally track what channel they came through. You don't want to override that. And so having the two separate pieces to track between, what was the path they took to get to us and what was the way that they found out about us. The self-reported attribution piece is the what was the way they found out about us. There's lots of data suggesting that you can ask that question in forms, and it has almost no impact on your conversion rates in forms. It doesn't decrease conversion rate in forms. Who knows whether that plays out long term, but there's lots of data coming out that suggests that's the case. So you can ask them up front. Some people suggest it's better to have a free text and then go back and align, because you'll get more true answers rather than the drop down. We're currently doing a drop down, but we will be testing whether free text works better. But we also, the second they enter our sales pipeline and the second we have a sales conversation with them, whether it's a qualification one or further along, it is a required field. We have to ask the question. Every time a salesperson speaks with them, we have to make sure that field is filled. If they've already filled it, we don't ask it again, but it is a required field. Every time something moves along in the sales stages, if it's not yet filled, it's a pop-up. Right, can't move it along until we've filled that field. Which, on all of these things, I would say there's going to be some error. Right? Are people going to remember where they heard about us correctly? Sometimes a salesperson going to put it in because it's a required field, even though they don't have the answer? Yes, all of these things are true. I don't think. I'd love your take on this, Jim. I don't think they need to be perfect in order for them to be super helpful, right? And obviously, if we're getting it from the horse's mouth, it might be a bit more accurate than if we're trying to track it in places we can't track.
Yeah, and I would say, none of our data is perfectly accurate, even though we've been led to believe that for the past decade. Like, oh, it's digital and we can track it. Like, it's filled with so many flaws, and I've seen it all. Like, it's not accurate. So one other thing about the self-reported survey data is that even if it's not how they actually first found out about you, maybe they clicked on a paid ad the first time they ever interacted with you, But if they say the podcast was how they found out about you, that's what stuck with them, right? That's how they remember. That's what they remember the most. So that is probably more valuable to know that than, oh, they happened to click on this ad, but they don't even remember that. They remember the podcast. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting way to think about it. It's not just where did they first hear about you, it's what was the most memorable place that they heard about you. And we get lots of those that are, I would say one of the main ones aside from content is referrals. That's coming up a lot more than it was before we were doing self-reported attribution. And so that's been really interesting to see as well. We actually have it split out into two pieces, which is like business community referral, because we're trying to figure out like more specifically where they came from. Like the personal referrals, I think stop scaling at a certain size of business. And so I really want to understand like how many of them are like an individual person referring, which is quite often clients or somebody we know, versus we're getting referrals from within a Facebook community, a LinkedIn community, or an actual business networking community. And so that's another one for us as well. But I like that point. And the other, I wonder how much you could also think of it in terms of if it is wrong, maybe that's just also where they personally hear about things, right? And so maybe you should be going there more often because that is the place that they're like, oh, I usually hear about these things in business networking communities, so I'll write that. I wonder if there's any validity to that, or if that's helpful at all. But
that actually segues onto one of the questions that I was going to have for you.
Oh, yes.
Which was, like, when you start, when you begin, it's like omni-channel. Right, like it's just spread far and wide based off of an information set that we have that we're pretty sure our avatar is going to sit inside. But then after a certain point, when do you know, or when do you start to get an indication, or when do you think that you start to get an indication of, okay, let's narrow, let's chunk down into this particular avenue because we're starting to see like systematic results yield. Like I know that, and it's a bit of an open-ended question, but when do you start to feel that you get that level of insight to then go, cool, we now know that TikTok is going gangbusters, so let's double down here. Or like LinkedIn groups is going really, really well. We can see here business networking is performing well. Let's think of a cohesive strategy just to really leverage here. Like, when do you think you start seeing that?
This is actually kind of something that Jim and I recorded a podcast together yesterday, by the way. And this is very much Jim's area of expertise. I'll give my amateur version of the answer, and then maybe, Jim, you can give some extra insight too. To me, you have to be careful of focusing on the things that you can measure, right? So is it the main place that you're getting results, or is it the main place that you're measuring? Jim gave an amazing example yesterday of somebody in the dark trying to find their keys, right? And so they walk over and they've lost their keys, and they walk over and they look under the street lamp because that's where the light is. It's not necessarily where the keys are, right? And I think that that's so true in terms of what happens in a lot of businesses is they're looking to extend on a strategy that they can measure, but they have to be more realistic about whether it's working, right? Whether it's actually developing pipeline, whether it's actually developing revenue. You know, a good example is lots of people running lead magnets, right? Clickbaity lead magnets that trick people into giving their email address and their phone number and then calling those people, and those people entering the database and the generating pipeline and then converting it 1%, right? Is that working? So what's the measure of working is probably an important piece. Is it the only thing you can measure? And if it really is working, are you going to have to decrease other things in order to increase it? Because actually, I'll throw to you on this a bit, Jim, because the different elements that you've been working on quite often interact with each other. And if you've got to turn something off in order to turn something up, sometimes you ruin the mix. What would you say, Jim? What's your version of this as a proper expert?
Yeah, so I was actually going to maybe push back a little bit on the premise that like when you're just starting out, you're kind of doing everything, like spreading it all around and like trying to hit every single place that your avatar might be. I would probably, in most cases, recommend you pick one or two channels and focus wholly on those until you've proven them out and you've kind of you take all of your effort and focus on those, right? And then you can measure at what point are you reaching this level of diminishing returns where an additional dollar in does not yield enough marginal output or revenue, whatever it might be, to make it worth it, right? And once you've kind of tapped out that channel, then you go to the next channel and explore that. And then after you've tapped that out, you go to the next channel and you kind of build out from there. And as far as, you mentioned, like, how do you know if you've like kind of hit on one of these channels that it's, maybe we need to double down in TikTok or what it might be. A couple of ways that I always recommend and that we do with our clients is through randomized controlled trials. So testing out, let's run a test. Let's double our spend in TikTok and measure the results. And then also if you have something running in the background like a marketing mix model, that can also feed into, you could have the randomized controlled trial data feed into that and help kind of fine tune the model to really show what's the ROI or the CPA of a particular channel.
Yeah. And I would just say, like, whenever something's working, know what working means and know that it's actually working and focus more on the actual revenue result that it's driving. And I know you very much do this, Hugh, but there's a lot of businesses focus on, okay, this is working because it's driving a lot of pipeline and leads, and this is why leads is quite often a bad metric. It's driving a lot of leads, and the sales team are sitting there going, the leads suck. Why do the leads suck? Well, the leads suck maybe because you tricked them into downloading a piece of content and giving their email, and it had nothing to do with wanting to actually buy a thing or solve a problem. And so now they downloaded that template, and you've got an SDR team that's calling them and saying, oh, hey, you downloaded that piece of content. Maybe we want to talk to you, right? And so those are going to convert at a super low rate because the intent is incorrect, right? And so what is the measure of working? Have we proven it out that it actually is generating revenue and positive pipeline and high converting scalable pipeline? Because to me, scalable pipeline is, I don't want to have to hire a ton of expensive salespeople in order to sit there and try and convert 1% converting leads.
Yeah. It's one of the things you see a lot is people conflate curiosity with consent. So when you have the lead magnet like that, they come in and they're like, that's interesting enough for me to have a look at it, but it's not consent really to move into a sales conversation. But too often you see a lot of people do we see it pretty systematic, right? Like you see a lot of, chuck the details in here, get this thing. This thing has little or no value to the actual person, but they're curious enough to do it, right? And then you have this artificially inflated front-end pipe, and they're like, yeah, fantastic, we've got tons of volume in there because we've measured the wrong thing. And I'm a big advocate for thinking, okay, well, the measurement there shouldn't necessarily be the lead number, but it should be the lead value. Like, what does that lead equate to in secured revenue in terms of evaluation? And then once you've shifted that slightly, the marketing or the lead generators and the marketers are slightly more on the hook for revenue attribution, because then you can have them go, well, we know that if you have a pot of this much and it sits in here as an average, and then we can move it through, then you're also the targeted for like driving revenue value, not just saying we've given you 100 leads this month, because then it doesn't necessarily work. So
where's the crossover between marketing and sales? Because to me it's like and I got this concept from a guy named Chris Walker from a company called Refine Labs, and this is very much what we've implemented for ourselves. Where's the crossover between sales and marketing where there's some shared responsibility? And for me it's if I'm going to build a sales team, and salespeople are not cheap, right? Salespeople are not cheap. If I'm going to build a sales team, what is the volume of pipeline at a certain conversion percentage where it makes sense that I really want a sales team to be focusing on it, right? And to me, that's probably somewhere north of 25% conversion rate, right? For like an onshore, expensive, closing, account executive type salesperson, I don't really want them talking and dealing with anybody that's less than 25% conversion, right? I might have a qualification team that starts talking to people maybe from a stage in the process that's 5% plus, right? And qualifies out, develops, moves them into that stage, for anyone using business to BDR, SDR type teams, appointment setters. Although I prefer, rather than appointment setters, to me they're qualifiers, right? That's the qualification process, is that section in the middle. But so the marketing goal then becomes, if my target is X, I need to deliver enough pipeline to that stage in the sales process from which we convert 25%, right? And then if that mark moves, if that part of the sales process now becomes 15% because the lead quality's gone down, we will be able to see that, and it'll stop being sales teams going, the leads suck. We're just getting sent junk leads. I say this all the time, but if your sales team is saying to you the leads suck and they would rather cold call someone than call your leads, I promise you the leads suck.
The leads suck. Yeah.
Salespeople take the path of least resistance. If they're not calling the marketing leads suck. I absolutely guarantee it. If the marketing leads are good, they're fighting each other for them. And they're complaining, why don't I get more of the leads? Why do they get all of those leads? Why don't I get any of the ones from Australia? If they're fighting over the leads, your leads are good. If they're avoiding them and they're not getting called, your leads suck. Almost all the time. So where's that crossover point? At what point does it become worthwhile having a salesperson involved? And then measure the marketing team on that, right? X amount of pipeline to that stage in the sales process means we can hit our target, we can hit our goal. And so measure them on that. Start to roll them over between each other. So it's not, I've got to deliver this amount of leads and I've got to deliver this amount of sales, because they just end up butting heads and working against each other.
100%.
And marketing stops focusing on building pipeline. Actually, like we've started talking about in our team, a really good way to get your marketing team thinking is, what if you didn't have a sales team? Market as if you didn't have a sales team. What if the only way that we could make deals, like we're an e-commerce store, is that they had to arrive on the website ready to buy, and you were going to put price in front of them and they had to go purchase, right? You're not allowed to trick them into being leads. You're trying to actually get them to transact, except when they arrive, we're going to book them in with a salesperson, right? But from a mentality perspective, what if there was no sales team? Market like that, especially in B2B, because B2B marketers have got away with it for so many years of just generating all these event leads and whatever that do nothing. They need to deliver actual pipeline. They need to be delivering pipeline that's ready to buy. And sorry, I'm going to go one more step with this, which is we really need leaders in businesses to stop trying to make it hard for sales teams, right? I hear this all the time. Well, we're paying them commissions, we're doing all this. I want them to work on the difficult stuff, right? Their job is to sell to people that didn't necessarily want it. No, your job is to need, and now apologies to the sales teams around the world, your job is to need the least amount of salespeople possible, right? To create efficiency. The least amount of salespeople possible as you scale, right? And so you want them working on the highest converting stuff. And you know what? If a customer comes through and they just literally take an order, you're winning. You're not losing with your sales team. You're winning. That is the perfect place to be. I hear someone say, all our sales team are order takers. I'm like, are they taking a lot of orders? And they're like, yes. I'm like, awesome. You're where everybody wishes they were.
It's a really good problem to have. Like it's and this is the thing that kind of drives me a little bit bonkers. They go, yeah, they're just transacting. It's like, even that takes skill. Even that
it does.
Pivotal moment of the process, You have to have the right salesperson on it because you are talking about a transaction. Money is involved.
Yeah.
And if you
Certainty,
cannot,
belief, trust, all that stuff.
all of it. And if you cannot articulate that, and if you cannot guide somebody through that critical moment of the process the right way, doesn't matter how many leads they give you, you're gonna drop the ball every single time. So even
It's
the
so
transactional
true.
piece has to be done. Has to be done right. It drives me bonkers. It literally was just aggressively nodding as you were going through that. I was like, yep. All of that it drives me mad. Because they're like, here's a ton of leads. And you're like, awesome. Are they ready to go? Probably in about 18 months, they'll be good. I was like, fantastic. So why are they in the sales pipeline right now?
Isn't that,
And I'm
isn't
like,
that
because it's a
marketing's
lead.
job then?
It's like, it's a lead. No, it's not.
They filled
It's
in a
not
form.
lead. Yeah,
They
amazing.
filled in a form. They must be ready. That's
Yeah,
intent.
fantastic.
Filling in a form is intent.
Yeah,
For what, though?
yeah,
For what?
yeah.
I think that comes back to the point around measurement as well, not just marketing measurement, but sales measurement. And having really good, appropriate goals for what you want to achieve, right? Having good KPIs for sales teams that aren't just about converting, because if you make the goal about conversions and deals, people will find ways to make it happen that aren't necessarily a great customer experience. Whereas if you define their goals more around how easy it is to flow through the process, are we hitting the right marks? Are we making it easy for people to buy from us? Are they having a great experience in terms of how they understand the product and how it solves their problem and how they get handed over, and the level of notes and the level of detail in the handover so that the person who's then going to onboard them understands it? Like all of that stuff, if you're measuring that stuff and having them focus on helping people, actually you tend to get better sales conversions anyway.
100%. Like, and this is this ties into it's a conversation that I was having with someone yesterday. They were trying to work out. This is a bit of a rabbit hole, but they were trying to work out how to structure pay for their salesperson, and that's just one element of the actual process as a whole. Like, it's all synergistic, like it all ties into each other. Because, and this is going to probably annoy a few salespeople that are out there, but salespeople are inherently quite lazy. Like, they're going to go with the, like you said, the path of least resistance. So we've got to make sure that the path of least resistance is the right way for the customer, right? For the person to go through the journey. And when you factor in pay, if you incentivize people getting started on your clients coming on board or anything like that, then ultimately they're gonna put that need first, and then they're going to shoehorn people into something that probably shouldn't be there. So then you take a step back, you look at the salary component of it, you go, you should pay a salesperson. First of all, they are expensive, absolutely. You'll be the most highest paid people in the company, typically. But you should pay them in a sweet spot. It's the Goldilocks principle. You don't want to underpay them, because then what they'll do is they'll shoehorn people into sales that shouldn't be in there. Then you have massive detractors and unhappy customers and people that are causing problems down the line. You shouldn't overpay them so that there isn't an incentive to actually transact, because you do need that as a commission component. It's just right. You want to make sure that everything is covered. They're in a place of comfort, but there is something to be working towards. Like, it's just kind of sitting in that happy middle ground. You do that, and then you create a journey, you create a process that is enjoyable, that they enjoy doing, and the customer and the person enjoys going through, and you genuinely have a something that is going to solve an awesome problem, and you can just communicate that really simply. Then people get to the end of it and they thank you for going through it. They're like, this is the best. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm super excited. Like, this is the best outcome. And you're like, yeah, done. Like, that's the
Sure
that's the most rewarding
sign
part
of a great sales process is when your
100%.
customers are regularly thanking you at the end of the sales process. Best sign you've got a great sales process and great salespeople.
Yeah.
When people transact and then leave reviews and name the salespeople specifically, also another great sign, and something that should be massively celebrated, right? Because it shows that the salesperson gave them a great experience through the process, not just tried to force them into it. I promise you, the salespeople that are pressuring people in and over-promising and doing all those things, they don't get mentioned in reviews. They don't get mentioned in reviews. They're the ones where the person gets in and has a bit of buyer's remorse, and they're like, "Oh, actually, can I cancel? And can I do?" Yeah. Are you with us, JP?
Actually,
have you got a? Oh,
product review.
Sorry, you go, Hugh.
No, all good. Let's get JP.
JP, have you got a question?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Better? Yeah, I resonate with a lot of stuff I've said before. Hugh made a lot of really good points. I think on the point that you made a while back, like in my mind, curiosity always comes before consent. And that probably speaks to a clash that happens in like all of the sales process, that like this lead is then put like much further beyond where they should be. So yeah, that's my question to you, Ben. I think like a lot of like the clash that happens in general in businesses is that business wants things to move much faster than they actually can, and like is probably going to take 12 months because that person needs to be educated on a technology they have no idea about, and then they need to understand the ROI, and then a whole bunch of stuff needs to happen along the way, and the business kind of wants it to happen in 6. And that just creates so many problems. So how do you think about value add throughout long sales processes? Do you think about this, like map this out on the whiteboard, have a piece structured for every step of the way and do it that way? Or do you think about it differently? Is it very situational and contextual to the type of person you're selling to? But yeah, I'd love to get your take on this.
Yep. This is, I think, actually a difficult question to answer because it is kind of contextual. I think with anybody in any sales process, the most important place to start is like, what's the problem that we're solving and who are we trying to solve it for? We talked earlier about developing avatars, your key customer profiles in relation to marketing. I think that those are an essential for businesses, not just for marketing, but for sales as well, because we have to understand where they're at in their journey. There's a lot of people out there that are selling solutions to problems that people don't even know they have. And so you can't sell someone a solution for a problem they don't know they have. Who's got the budget for it? Who's responsible for it? They don't even know they've got it, right? So in that case, you're talking about a multiple step educational sales process. You have to educate them and sell them on the problem before you can even sell the solution. So once you're aware of where your customers predominantly sit in their kind of adoption cycle, the stages of awareness, are they aware of the problem? Are they aware of the solution? Are they shortlisting? Like, where are they at? You can start to build a bit of a plan for them. I think that all of this, though, whilst fundamentally true, gets in the way of a lot of sales and marketing teams, right? I think that knowing that we need to have these plans for people, individualized, personalized plans, has led many businesses to significantly overcomplicate what they're trying to do, right? And it's like, if we're not doing all of it, then we may as well not do any of it. And so for me, it's like, what's the minimum viable product version of this customer journey, right? We know we've got a heap of customers that have no idea what the problem is yet. Okay, so that is going to be essential. How are we going to educate them on the problem? Are we going to go to events? Are we going to run a podcast? Are we going to do a bunch of white papers? What's the content? What's the way that we're going to sell them on the problem? First and foremost, that should not be the sales team's job, right? That is too far up the funnel, right? But what are those small incremental pieces that are super important? It's like the Pareto principle, right? What's the 20% of things we can do that are going to get us 80% of the way and simplify for them? How are we going to sell them on the problem? How are we then going to bring them into a pipeline from an individualized, personalized profile perspective? So if I know that maybe one of my profiles is in government, for example, I'm going to need a different way in order to entice them along to have a conversation about a solution than somebody that's from a construction business, for example. And so I think once you get to the point of we're doing a good job of teaching them about the problem and selling them on the problem, then how do I individualize for my 3-4 individual avatars, and maybe start with one, right? Depending on how big or small you are. If you're a small business, just pick a niche, pick one, and go, here's how I'm selling the problem, here's exactly who I'm trying to sell to, and here's a couple of channels that I can go after. And then from a sales process perspective, how do I develop them along? It's mostly going to have to be that I've got to get them in my database, and I've got to make sure that they are consuming my content, but I don't want to force them out of that. I want them to self-opt in. And so giving them lots of opportunities, not necessarily always calls to action, but lots of opportunities and really easy ways to get in touch with you. And I think for most businesses, that core piece for how you then allow them to opt in is mostly going to be your website. I don't know how good of an answer that is. I would actually like maybe take a step back from that and say, if you really know the problem that you want to solve and you develop great content for how you want to solve it, people will mostly nurture themselves, right? If you build a really good content engine around how you're going to solve a problem, and you talk to customers' challenges and you talk to their journey, and you can articulate their world better than they've ever heard it articulated before, and they start to feel that connection, they will largely nurture themselves. And I think that's where something like a podcast, a vlog, any of these things become hugely valuable, because you don't necessarily have to move them. They'll follow you along the journey, and they'll connect to the pieces of content that are at their part of the journey. You just have to make sure you're building content that hits each of those stages. Does that answer the question? I think you'd probably have a really good answer for this as well, JP.
I think you get a great answer, mate.
All right. Well, I'm just going to quickly answer 2 questions that I got sent in, and then we'll wrap up, unless anybody's got another one after that. So I got a question in from a friend of ours, JP, Mr. Jack Waddell. Would you believe? He said, what's the best way to build a sales process that can be scaled? This is in itself somewhere in the vicinity of 50 books to read and a whole bunch of courses to attend. But the simple answer for me is that, look, sequence is really important. And so pick a sales process that is out there and learn it, right? And that might be spin selling by Neil Rackham. It might be the pitch anything model from Oren Klaff. It might be gap selling from Keegan. There's 100 of these things that give a good, clear, like, what's the series that we should go through. I think my absolute favorite is the reverse selling method from a good friend of mine, Mr. Pete Lakovich. Can attest to that is a very good way to go about selling. But sequence is really important. Knowing in which order should I do things is, I think, important. And so pick a methodology, and just by picking one and following it, I promise all of them work. They all work to some degree, right? Just having a good order and a good sequence is the start. The second thing is, write it out, document it. And don't document the finished product, document draft number 1, 1.0, right? What do I think this could be like? And then do it in exactly that order, right? Write a script for it and exactly follow that script yourself. And test it, because you'll start to feel, where does it work and where does it not work? And then you make the 1.1 and the 1.2 and the 1.3, and now we're version 2. It is a constantly evolving thing, your sales process. And if you approach it that way, if you go, I'm never going to make a sales process that's the same forever, and you get that mindset in place, and it's a constantly developing thing, you will always see improvements in your conversion, but you will also always continue to adapt to your customers, right? Because the way they buy changes, the way the market is responding to different challenges, their understanding and their education around problems and solutions changes. And so if you treat it as a constantly evolving document and process, you'll find that you adapt as you go. But learn a process that's out there. It doesn't matter which one, just pick one. Challenge a methodology, whatever. Anybody got any others? There's hundreds. But pick one, write down your version of it in terms of the sequence of steps, make a script based on those sequence of steps, and then practice with it and try it and update it, right? I think that's the best advice I can give. I can do a whole session around what should that sequence be. What's the sequence that I use? But that's not for this one. And that's a very long workshop. I know some people here have been in those workshops. That's a very long one, but it actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's my one, doesn't matter whether it's Neil Rackham's one, it doesn't matter whether it's Oren Klaff's one or Peter Lakovich's one. Pick one, document it, execute it, adjust it. That's the best advice I can give around sales process. I know this is an area of expertise for both you, Hugh, and JP. Anything you'd add on to that?
I think you nailed it. Like, just start. Like, just start. It's never perfect out the gate. Like, it doesn't exist. The perfect sales process is a fable. It's a myth. Like, it's a continuous cycle of improvement that you get insight from your sales team. Right? They will tell you very quickly what's done, like in your sales process. Like, they're going to verbalize that like immediately.
They might not tell you verbally. They just stop doing it.
Yeah, well, yeah, they just go in revolt. Like, this is just mass exodus, and they're like, nah, I'm not doing this anymore. But no, that's exactly it. Like, it doesn't matter. I think people obsess quite severely over like what's the best one for me, or like which one should I use. Doesn't exactly what you said. Doesn't matter. Pick one, start with it, refine it, optimize it, practice it. Just keep going through the motions, and it will get better. It will get better. It will get better. And don't be afraid to tweak it. But where there's massive risk is if you start thrashing. If you start fundamentally changing everything because you're like, oh, it's not working. Well, it's not working because you've only been doing it for 2 minutes, first of all. Secondly, like, just change one little thing and then see how that goes. Otherwise, if you change a whole ton of stuff, you've got no idea what was the fulcrum, like what actually like moved it forward. But I couldn't have put it better. Like, you know, I think that's bang on. Yeah.
I think that extra piece you added there is really critical, because I do see a lot of people build a sales process and try and use it, and it's not getting them the results they want. And then they throw it out the window and try something else. It's never perfect first time. Oh man, sometimes when I've built a new sales process and I use it I always test it for myself, and I use it for the first time, I get off the phone with someone and I'm just like, get that feeling in my stomach like I want to vomit. Like, that was so disgusting. That was gross. I hated every second of that. But you always learn something from it. Like, oh, as the words were coming out of my mouth, it just felt gross.
Yeah.
What about you, JP? Have you got anything else to add to that?
Two quick things. First is, like, I think success with the sales process is when you notice, like, your reps start talking about things in the vocabulary of the sales process. Like, I think that's a big thing when, like, the culture gets around this, and it's like, this has happened, they're qualified because X has happened, and everyone can agree to the same terms, and that actually helps your business a lot, because then you're like, we're all on the same page. The second thing is, like, with like selling large software deals, I think what helps a lot that only few people do is, after you have advocates, you should definitely do a session with them that you map with them what their buying decision was, and go, like, you know, like, tell me how you decided to buy us, and then you show them your sales process. they'll just laugh you out the room. They'll be like, this is ridiculous. That's so different to what we actually do. So the two are never going to be perfectly aligned, but there'll probably be a few adjustments that you'll get from them. They'll tell you things like, "Oh, we did that process," and you don't have an equivalent step in your sales process that you could add, or one that you could remove. So yeah, talk to your buyers about how they bought, and try and align it to your sales process is a useful step that some people make.
I think that's so important. Don't build a sales process based on how you want to sell. Build a sales process based on how your customers buy, and not necessarily always how they want to buy, but how they do buy. Sometimes there is a gap even in their understanding of how they buy. But I totally agree with you. Like, understanding that, talking to your customers. I've never shown a customer my sales process before. That sounds incredibly scary, but I definitely am going to try that now. I think that's the ultimate test, isn't it? Right? Yeah. And that's the ultimate test of what's the purpose of the sales process. Because if you wouldn't put your sales process in front of your customer, are you doing stuff that's maybe a bit cringy? Like, why wouldn't you show them? I had someone say to me the other day, that they don't like, the old school type sales floors, with boards, with customer deals and things all over it. And their point was like, would you want your customer to walk your sales floor? And if you wouldn't, it's probably not a sales floor that's built to help your customers. Yeah. Right? And that should be the ultimate goal of selling, is to help them. And I think that piece around, like, if you wouldn't show your sales process to your customer, is it designed to help them? Or is it designed to convince them to buy something they don't necessarily need? Definitely going to try that one out. Okay, I've got one more question in here from a Linda L. I do know a Linda L, but I don't have a surname here, so I won't shout her out in case it's not her. Well, I think we've answered this a little bit. How do you get your sales team to call your leads? This is a great question. And the answer is usually get better leads. Yeah. If the sales team aren't calling them. Okay, now there's a version of this where actually the leads aren't the problem and it's a timing problem. So if the question is, how do you get your sales team to call your leads on time? I think that's a different question. It's a really important one, and it's one that a lot of people get wrong. Timing is everything. Speed to action is everything. If you are generating active inbound inquiries, people with unresolved questions, right? How does this work? How much does this cost? How do I buy this? If they're out really asking like buying questions and they're unresolved queries, I can guarantee that you're probably not the only person that they're asking them to, right? Unless they've decided, I'm buying HubSpot and now I'm trying to figure out how. That's a bit different. But for a lot of businesses, they're just trying to find a solution, for us with outsourcing. If they come to us asking active, unanswered questions, you have to answer the question really quickly. Whoever answers first, especially in B2B decision making, the first person to answer the question will win the deal more than 50% of the time, right? And if you're in, let's say, you're in the world of construction, if you're an electrician or something like that, it's not how quickly you answer their query, it's how quickly you get them a quote, right? But ultimately, it's how quickly do they get certainty around what the next step is and whether they want to go ahead. Do they have the information in order to be able to proceed? And so if the question is ultimately, how do I get them to call them faster? How do I get them to prioritize? I think that answer is really simple. It's not always easy because there's resource allocations involved. I think most businesses that have an inbound lead strategy need to have an inbound salesperson, right? Yep. And that won't necessarily always be a high-paid salesperson. Sometimes you might have somebody offshore answering those leads. Sometimes you might have a receptionist that answers those inbound queries, right? Lots and lots of electricians and the like have somebody in the office where somebody calls in or emails in and asks a question. If you can get back to them within, and I'll set some KPIs for people here, It's better if it's even less than this, but if you can get back to them and have them an answer within an hour, you're probably ahead of most of your competition. Where you need to do a quote, where you might need to do a site visit or something like that, you need to get the booking in, but you need to get the quote done super fast, within a day, within 2 days max, because people don't trust that they're actually going to get quotes from tradespeople, as an example. And so they won't stop asking for people to come around and quote them until they've got a quote in their hands. But most of the time, whoever gives them the quote first wins. And this applies to lots and lots and lots of different types of businesses. So split it out. Who is going to take the inbound queries that is always available to take them, right? And if you can manage it, if you've got customers all over the world in your 24-hour time zones and you can manage it, have people in 24-hour time zones, right? Cover the whole thing, because if you can answer the query quickly, if you can get them their quote, you can get them their proposal, their pricing, their whatever, if you're first and you're fast, you will win most of the time. Imagine you could just do that and that meant you had a 50% conversion rate. Right? Be fast, be first. So if that's the question, that's my answer. I can see Hugh nodding away. I know this is something you help people to do. If the question is, how do I get them to call them because they refuse to call the leads, it's what we said before. The leads are probably actually terrible, and you need to do something about lead quality. Anyone got anything to add to that?
I think you nailed it. Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, we will wrap up. This was a lot of fun. Glad everyone could come along, and I had some friendly faces to ask me some questions on the first live. The episode will be out sometime in the next few weeks. But yeah, really appreciate it. Really appreciate everybody jumping on and asking questions and supporting.
Awesome, Ben. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, everyone.